The 50-foot Gala screen behind Amara Vanderpool changed before she finished her sentence. 1 second, it displayed the genetic therapy model she had spent 7 years building. The next, her research disappeared behind Chloe Sloane's white silk portrait and Dominic Kingsley's black-suited name. Amara stood in crimson under the stage lights, a black woman in red framed between a husband dressed like a verdict and a mistress dressed like innocence. Then Dominic lifted the microphone and said, "Effective tonight, Dr. Vanderpool is no longer part of Kingsley Biotech's executive leadership, and our marriage is over." The room did not break, it adjusted. Investors straightened in their seats. Cameras turned toward her face. Chloe stepped half an inch closer to Dominic, delicate, pale, and ready to inherit a story she had never understood. Amara did not lower her eyes. She did not reach for her wedding ring. She touched the hard edge of the red wax-sealed envelope inside her clutch and realized Dominic had mistaken public humiliation for legal control. That was his first mistake. Dominic continued with the polished ease of a man who had rehearsed cruelty until it sounded like strategy. He spoke of transition, brand clarity, investor confidence, and a more approachable face for the breakthrough genetic drug. He never said theft. Men like Dominic rarely did. They wrapped theft in language smooth enough for shareholders and cold enough for wives. Behind him, Chloe held her posture like a press release, her white silk dress catching the light while her eyes searched the audience for approval. Amara watched the teleprompter instead. The wording was too clean. The announcement had been drafted by counsel, reviewed by the board, and staged to make her look like a liability before she could object. "Kingsley Biotech owns every operational pathway," Dominic said. "The science is secure." Amara's fingers tightened once around the clutch. Secure. That single word told her what he believed. He thought the company name on the banners meant ownership. He thought her absence from the final Gala speech meant her absence from the invention. He thought because his signature sat on acquisition paperwork, her family's bloodline protections had vanished. But the core platform was not a chair, not a building, not a company logo that could be transferred with a divorce decree. It was a protected genetic architecture built under the Vanderpool legacy, locked beneath a non-transferable ownership structure older than Dominic's ambition and sharper than his lawyers. "Amara," Dominic said, turning toward her with theatrical softness, "I hope you'll accept this with dignity." She took one step forward. The movement was small enough not to frighten the cameras and exact enough to change the temperature of the room. "Dignity was never yours to grant," she said. The front row went still. Dominic's jaw held its shape, but the confidence behind his eyes narrowed. Chloe's hand hovered near his sleeve and stopped before touching him. Amara looked past both of them toward the black and white Kingsley backdrop, where her name had already been erased from the launch visuals. 3 months of changed access passwords. 3 months of delayed lab approvals. 3 months of Dominic testing how quietly he could remove her from her own work. The betrayal had not begun tonight. Tonight was only the performance. Amara turned from the microphone before anyone could turn her pain into footage. As she walked off the stage, the crimson silk moved like a warning across the white floor. No one stopped her. Not because they respected her yet, but because power sometimes leaves so calmly that the room needs a few seconds to understand it has gone with her. In the private corridor beyond the Gala doors, she opened her clutch, pressed her thumb against the Vanderpool seal, and felt the wax ridge beneath her skin. Inside waited the patent draft Dominic had never seen, marked with the hidden security signature that could freeze an empire before midnight. Behind her, applause resumed for the cameras. Ahead of her, the legal war had already begun. The corridor outside the Gala hall was colder than the stage, kept at 68 degrees for donors in tailored wool and cameras that hated sweat. Amara Vanderpool stood beneath a strip of white ceiling light and let the door close. Behind her, without looking back, the applause on the other side became muffled by glass, marble, and money. It sounded like a room congratulating itself for misunderstanding the most dangerous woman inside it. She opened her crimson clutch, removed the red wax-sealed envelope, and held it between 2 fingers as if it weighed less than paper and more than a corporation. "He filed the launch language," she said quietly. The quiet assistant standing near the service entrance looked at her, unsure whether to offer help or pretend not to witness history. Amara did not need comfort. She needed a secure line. Inside the envelope rested the patent draft Dominic had never bothered to read because he believed power lived where cameras pointed. The first page carried ordinary legal language. The second carried a technical summary precise enough to terrify anyone who understood gene therapy. Beneath the watermark, invisible under regular light, was the Vanderpool family security signature embedded in the draft's chain of custody. Dominic had mistaken absence for surrender. Amara placed the document beneath the corridor's ultraviolet verification panel. The hidden mark appeared, sharp and blue-white against the page. "There you are," she said under her breath, not to Dominic, not to Chloe, but to the part of herself that had almost confused betrayal with defeat. She photographed the verification mark through the encrypted compliance app tied to her family trust. Then she sent the first notice. Not to Dominic, not to the board, not to anyone begging for drama. She sent it to the International Licensing Office with a restricted emergency flag. Disputed ownership of core genetic platform, unauthorized public commercialization, immediate hold requested pending authorship review. One measured motion. One irreversible consequence. Behind the Gala doors, Dominic was probably smiling for donors, telling them Kingsley Biotech had entered a new era. He did not know the new era had already been placed under review. Chloe was likely accepting compliments in that fragile white dress, her hand resting near his sleeve as if proximity could become expertise. She did not know every statement she made tonight would soon be measured against patent history, regulatory filings, and technical truth. Amara slid the patent draft back into the envelope and pressed the wax seal flat with her thumb. Her face remained calm, but her mind was moving through every hallway Dominic had tried to lock. Access passwords changed 3 months ago. Lab approvals delayed without explanation. Final presentation edits routed through PR instead of science. Her removal had been planned, not improvised. That realization did not make her weaker. It made her cleaner. Pain became evidence when a brilliant woman stopped trying to be loved by the person stealing from her. The senior lawyer on the secure line answered in less than 10 seconds. Amara spoke without raising her voice. Freeze every derivative license connected to the Kingsley launch until the Vanderpool ownership review is complete. A pause followed, professional and heavy. Then the senior lawyer said the only words Amara needed. Understood. She ended the call before emotion could enter the room. From inside the Gala, Dominic's voice carried through the wall as he introduced Chloe as the future-facing heart of the company. Amara looked toward the sealed doors. "No," she said. "She is the face of your evidence." Then she turned away from the Gala hall and walked toward the private elevator, crimson silk cutting through the sterile corridor like a line drawn in bloodless ink. By the time Dominic lifted his champagne glass for the cameras, the approval pathway for his miracle drug had been frozen in silence. By the time Chloe posed beside the drug model, she could not explain. The first licensing alert had reached 3 regulatory desks. By the time the donors stood to applaud, Amara was already 12 floors below, stepping into the waiting night with the red envelope against her heart and the first piece of Dominic's empire locked inside her hand. By 2:17 a.m., Amara was inside the private research wing 30 miles north of the city, where the glass corridors had once felt like proof that intelligence could build something clean in a dirty world. The room was kept at 66 degrees to protect sensitive samples. But the cold that reached her was not mechanical. It came from the terminal, refusing her access. She entered her credentials once. Denied. She entered the emergency research authorization tied to her genetic platform. Denied. Then she tried the legacy key only 3 people should have known existed, and the screen showed the date of the override. 3 months earlier. Amara stood alone before the locked workstation, crimson silk beneath a sterile white lab coat, and understood the shape of the betrayal with surgical clarity. Dominic had not betrayed her at the Gala. He had only announced what he had been stealing in silence. For 3 months, he had locked her away from her own research one password at a time, delayed her lab approvals one signature at a time, and replaced scientific authority with PR language polished enough to fool investors who never looked beneath the surface. Her hand rested on the edge of the workstation. "So this was not weakness," she said to the empty room. "This was preparation." The sentence steadied her more than comfort ever could. Pain became useful once she gave it a job. She opened a separate offline drive stored in the fireproof research cabinet, The one Dominic had always considered old-fashioned because it did not flatter his digital empire. Inside were dated experiment logs, authorship records, assay validations, patent drafts, and internal memos proving that the core genetic platform had originated under the Vanderpool family structure before Kingsley Biotech ever attached its logo to the drug. The legal strategy formed first. She would prove non-transferable ownership, broken chain of custody, and unauthorized commercialization. The financial strategy formed second. She would notify institutional partners that every projected dollar attached to the drug now carried regulatory risk. The psychological strategy formed last, and it was the quietest. She would not interrupt Dominic's arrogance. She would let him keep talking. A man obsessed with being seen as king would eventually walk onto a public record and reveal he could not describe the throne he claimed. By dawn, Amara had built 3 evidence packets. One went to the International Licensing Office, expanding the emergency hold with technical exhibits. One went to the Family Legal Office, requesting enforcement of the Vanderpool ownership covenant. One stayed with her, sealed in the red envelope, because some truths were more powerful when revealed in the right room. At 6:40 a.m., Dominic sent a formal termination notice to her company email, stripping her title, lab privileges, and executive authority. Amara read it once from a mirrored backup account. He had written the language like a man locking a door after the house had already been deeded to someone else. She printed the notice and placed it beside the password change logs. "Thank you for dating the theft," she said. Across the city, Dominic was preparing press interviews with Chloe beside him in white, confident that the Gala had turned Amara into yesterday's scandal. He did not know reporters would soon ask why the lead scientist had vanished from the regulatory file. He did not know partners would demand proof that Kingsley had the right to license the platform. He did not know Chloe's scripted answers would become testimony against them both. Amara removed the crimson dress, folded it carefully, and changed into a red tailored suit from the emergency garment closet. The woman who had walked out of the Gala had been wounded. The woman who left the lab at sunrise was disciplined. She carried no fantasy of revenge, only a mapped sequence of consequences. Dominic believed no name on paper meant no power. Amara had just gathered the papers that would teach him the difference between ownership and decoration. Here is where most people misunderstand betrayal. It rarely begins with another woman. It begins with comparison. You see, Dominic Kingsley did not only want Chloe Sloan because she was easier to control. He wanted a version of power that did not remind him of his own emptiness. A brilliant wife forces an insecure husband to live beside evidence. Every board meeting where Amara Vanderpool was respected became a private humiliation to him. Every scientist who trusted her mind more than his title became a wound he could not name. So he reached for the oldest illusion. In luxury rooms, erase the woman, keep the invention, dress the theft in black tie, and call it leadership. But power is not found in the name on a building, but in the mind that makes the building possible. By noon, Amara was seated inside a private research suite overlooking the East River, her red tailored suit sharp against the pale glass walls, the red wax-sealed envelope placed at the center of the conference table like a small locked heart. The suite was not glamorous in the way Dominic understood glamour. There were no champagne towers, no branded step-and-repeat walls, no white silk mistress waiting for cameras. There were secured servers, sterilized workstations, temperature-controlled storage, and a wall of clean monitors ready to display proof. Amara preferred rooms that obeyed facts. She opened the first evidence packet and arranged the documents by consequence, not emotion. Patent origin, chain of custody, family covenant, unauthorized commercialization, password change logs, termination notice. Each page was a stone in the foundation of the life Dominic had tried to steal and the empire she was about to build without him. The senior lawyer joined by encrypted video, face composed, voice formal. The emergency hold has been acknowledged by the International Licensing Office. Amara lifted one page from the table. Then we widen it. She did not raise her voice, because real authority did not need volume to become dangerous. The next call went to a private funding group that had followed her work long before Kingsley Biotech placed gold lettering on glass doors. She did not beg for capital. She offered structure. A clean genetic platform, protected ownership, verified experimental records, and a leadership model where scientific authorship could not be laundered through marriage or marketing. The lead investor asked whether she intended to fight Dominic publicly. Amara looked toward the red envelope. I intend to make public fighting unnecessary. That sentence moved through the room with more force than anger. She spent the afternoon building the first operating map for Vanderpool Labs, not as a fantasy of escape, but as a controlled transfer of gravity. Her new company would not be a reaction to Dominic. It would be the original source, finally separated from the counterfeit brand. She marked 3 departments on the whiteboard: genetic architecture, regulatory protection, clinical ethics. Then she added a 4th in red marker: ownership integrity. The quiet assistant from the Gala corridor arrived with 2 sealed boxes from the old lab, recovered before Dominic's security team could classify them as company property. Amara opened the first box and found her handwritten essay notebooks wrapped in archival sleeves. The sight struck deeper than she expected, not because they were fragile, but because they were hers. Years of margins, corrections, failures, and breakthroughs sat in her hands, untouched by Dominic's speeches. For one breath, the empty lab returned to her memory, the locked terminal glowing like a closed door. Then she placed the notebooks beside the patent draft. No one rewrites this. By evening, the framework was ready. Vanderpool Labs existed first as documents, filings, server permissions, and signatures, which meant it existed in the only way that mattered before the world was invited to admire it. Outside, the city moved below in bright lines and glass towers, but Amara stayed still, studying the first incorporation draft bearing her family name. Dominic had tried to remove her from a company. He had not understood that she was never built to remain inside one. Vanderpool Labs began with no lobby sign, no public announcement, and no champagne photographs. It began in a secure research suite at 70 degrees, with Amara standing before a whiteboard in a red-tailored suit, dividing the future into 4 columns: science, ownership, licensing, and trust. Dominic had built Kingsley Biotech like a stage, polished from the outside and hollow behind the curtain. Amara built differently. She built like a woman who understood that empires do not fail when enemies attack them. They fail when their foundations were never honest. No borrowed names, she said. The quiet assistant wrote the phrase at the top of the incorporation packet. By morning, the first wave of recruitment began, not through flashy executive search firms, but through reputation. Senior geneticists who had once watched Dominic interrupt Amara in boardrooms received private technical invitations with no emotional language, only the facts. Independent platform, protected authorship, clean funding, full scientific credit. The first scientist replied within 9 minutes. The second forwarded a resignation draft from Kingsley. The third asked whether the Vanderpool Covenant would shield derivative work from corporate seizure. Amara answered personally, "Yes, that is the point." Across the city, Dominic staged his counteroffensive with all the tools he understood. He placed Chloe in a white silk dress under bright studio lights and positioned her beside a model of the genetic drug as if proximity could create knowledge. He gave interviews from the 42nd floor, black suit immaculate, voice controlled, hands clasped to hide the small tremor that had started after the emergency hold. He spoke of continuity, confidence, and leadership transition. Chloe repeated his phrases with practiced softness. She called the platform our family of therapies, then failed to define the core delivery mechanism when the lead journalist asked a technical follow-up. Amara watched the clip once. Then she added it to the evidence folder. The new lab took shape in disciplined silence. Server permissions were assigned by contribution, not status. Research records were time-stamped through a protected archive. Every assay notebook received duplicate custody seals. Every licensing draft contained a clause Dominic would have hated because it made theft expensive before it made theft public. Amara walked through each room before approving it, checking the distance between workstations, the data firewall structure, the controlled storage logs, and the way early career scientists spoke when no executive was performing authority over them. She did not want fear in her company. Fear had made Kingsley efficient and rotten. Brilliance needs oxygen, she told the operations lead. Give it rules, not chains. By the end of the first week, Vanderpool Labs had secured private funding, provisional research space, 3 senior hires, and a regulatory pathway independent from Kingsley Biotech. It was not enough for headlines. It was enough for gravity. The industry felt it before the public did. Partners who had praised Dominic's Gala stopped sending celebratory notes and began requesting clarification. Investors who once admired Chloe's market appeal asked for proof of patent control. Regulatory advisors sent polite language with dangerous implications. Please confirm legal authority to proceed. Please identify original platform owner. Please provide technical sign-off from Dr. Amara Vanderpool. Dominic answered none of it directly because direct answers required knowledge he did not possess. Instead, he ordered his communications team to increase Chloe's visibility. It made the problem worse. Her white dresses appeared in magazines, on business panels, across luxury biotech features written by people who loved glamour more than accuracy. Every appearance widened the gap between image and competence. Amara did not attack her publicly. She let Chloe testify through vanity. One afternoon, a secured courier delivered the first formal notice from the International Licensing Office. The hearing had been scheduled. Ownership review, technical competency inquiry, and potential operating license suspension would be considered together. Amara placed the notice beside the red envelope and the incorporation papers for Vanderpool Labs. For a moment, she saw the full pattern: the Gala, the locked lab, the stolen narrative, the empty title Dominic had tried to wear as armor. Then she signed the final founding resolution. The pen moved once across the page. Vanderpool Labs was no longer a plan. It was an institution. Outside the suite windows, the river turned silver beneath the afternoon sun, and Amara stood in red against the clean glass, not as a wife recovering from humiliation, but as the scientist whose stolen work had just become the center of a new world. The first sign that Amara had taken the market balance did not appear in a headline. It appeared in Dominic's inbox as a polite request from a major hospital network asking whether Kingsley Biotech could provide technical certification from Dr. Amara Vanderpool before proceeding with clinical partnership talks. The language was soft. The consequence was not. In biotech, hesitation from one institution became caution in 10 others by lunchtime. Dominic read the message in his black suit at the end of a glass conference table, surrounded by executives who had once treated his confidence like evidence. Now they washed his hands. He folded the letter twice, too sharply. "Draft a clarification," he said. No one moved fast enough. Across the river, Amara stood inside Vanderpool Labs in a crimson blouse beneath a structured red blazer, reviewing the same hospital inquiry from the other side of power. She had not begged them to doubt Dominic. She had simply given the industry enough truth to let doubt become professional hygiene. Her team had released no scandalous statement, no emotional accusation, no public attack on Chloe. They had circulated technical ownership documentation, regulatory notices, and a precise map of the platform's original chain of custody. The market understood what Dominic did not. If the mind behind the therapy was not inside Kingsley, the risk was not emotional. It was structural. By Tuesday, 3 licensing partners paused negotiations. By Wednesday, an investment bank requested revised risk disclosures. By Thursday morning, a quiet regulatory consultant advised Kingsley to avoid forward-looking revenue claims until the hearing concluded. Dominic ignored the advice for 6 hours. Then a journalist asked Chloe to explain why the delivery sequence in the patent file differed from her public description. Chloe sat in a white dress beneath studio lights, blinking once before reaching for the phrase Dominic's communications team had given her. It failed before it reached the sentence. "The therapy is built around patient-centered innovation," she said. The interviewer waited. "That is not a mechanism," the interviewer replied. Amara watched the clip from a conference room where the temperature was steady at 69 degrees and every monitor displayed real data instead of branding. She did not celebrate. Celebration belonged to people who needed defeat to feel like justice. Amara needed custody of the future. "Add the transcript to the hearing file," she said. The quiet assistant placed it in the evidence archive beside Chloe's prior interviews, Dominic's Gala remarks, and the termination notice that had dated his theft with executive arrogance. Then Amara turned back to the licensing model. Vanderpool Labs would not merely survive Kingsley's collapse. It would become the required standard for the next generation of protected genetic therapies. She approved a research ethics board, finalized scientist attribution policies, and signed a partnership memorandum with a national medical consortium that refused to proceed without her personal technical oversight. That signature changed the air. The consortium did not announce war on Dominic. It announced confidence in Amara. In luxury industries, reputation could be polished. In medicine, reputation had to be earned under pressure, where one dishonest line could damage lives, licenses, and fortunes. Dominic had tried to replace a genetic genius with a controllable face. The market now asked the face to calculate. At Kingsley Biotech, the board demanded a closed session. Dominic entered with practiced authority, but the room no longer leaned toward him. The lead shareholder placed a document on the table and asked one question. Can you explain the core platform without her? Dominic's mouth opened, then stopped. He knew the commercial narrative, the investor language, the Gala script, the easy phrases about innovation and family legacy. He did not know the science beneath the empire. His voice returned thinner than before. Our technical team can provide that. The lead shareholder did not look away. We asked you. That afternoon, Kingsley's stock lost value in a controlled fall that looked almost elegant from the outside and catastrophic from within. Amara saw the numbers only after finishing a review of protected trial protocols. She placed the report aside without expression. The downfall was not her destination. It was the correction of a false equation. Dominic believed visibility was power, Chloe believed visibility was safety, and the industry had finally remembered. That visibility without competence was just exposure. By sunset, Vanderpool Labs received the formal invitation to present at the international licensing hearing as the original platform owner. Amara lifted the red envelope from her desk, its wax seal still intact, its contents still waiting for the right room. Now, she said, we stop letting him borrow the future. Dominic's collapse began with silence, not scandal. The first bank did not accuse him of fraud. It simply reclassified Kingsley Biotech's expansion credit as restricted pending ownership review. The second bank requested additional collateral. The third stopped returning same-day calls. In rooms where Dominic had once been greeted like a visionary, assistants now placed him on hold with voices so polite they felt like locked doors. His black suit remained perfect, but perfection had become costume. He sat on the 42nd floor with the city spread behind him, staring at a financing schedule that no longer obeyed him. Get them on the line again, he said. The senior finance officer did not move. That pause was the first public betrayal of his authority. Across town, Vanderpool Labs continued at 70 degrees, clean, steady, and bright. Amara moved between workstations in red, reviewing licensing exhibits while her scientists finalized protected trial documentation. She did not need to announce that Kingsley was weakening. The market announced it for her through delays, withdrawals, and careful language. Former allies began stepping away from Dominic one disclaimer at a time. A hospital network suspended clinical talks. A private insurer withdrew preliminary coverage modeling. A medical consortium redirected its inquiry to Vanderpool Labs. Nobody shouted. Nobody needed to. Institutional abandonment has a quieter cruelty than rage because it arrives wearing procedure. Dominic's social world followed the money with embarrassing speed. The same donors who had stood at the gala and applauded Chloe's introduction stopped inviting him to closed dinners. The same venture partners who had praised his bold transition told their staff not to be photographed near Kingsley signage until the hearing concluded. The same board members who had watched him erase Amara now requested written documentation of every executive decision involving the platform. His kingdom did not burn. It emptied. Chloe felt it next. Her white dresses still appeared on magazine pages already scheduled weeks before, but the captions changed from elegant praise to careful suspicion. The lead journalist published her failed technical answer beside excerpts from patent history statements she had signed. Licensing investigators requested her communications records related to the false authorship materials. A professional review panel suspended her biotech compliance credential pending inquiry, and civil lawsuits began forming around the fake patent narrative Dominic had placed in her hands like jewelry. Chloe called Dominic from a private car outside a shuttered media entrance, her voice thin with panic. You told me it was clean. Dominic closed his eyes. Stay on message. She answered with the first honest thing she had said in months. I don't know the message anymore. At Kingsley, the board meeting became colder than the lab Amara had left behind. The lead shareholder slid a folder across the table containing bank notices, partner withdrawals, licensing alerts, and Chloe's interview transcript. Dominic reached for it, but his fingers shook against the edge of the paper. He tried to speak as CEO. What came out was half a sentence. The room waited for the rest and received nothing. For years, Dominic had confused obedience with loyalty. Now he discovered obedience had only been rented by confidence, and confidence had left the building. The board voted to restrict his authority over all matters connected to the genetic platform until the hearing. His operating access was narrowed. His media appearances required approval. His legal team was instructed to cooperate with investigators. Nobody asked whether he agreed. That was how power abandoned a man who had built it from borrowed intelligence. Dominic returned alone to his private office after dark, the black glass reflecting a face that still looked wealthy but no longer looked believed. On his desk sat the Gala program with Chloe's portrait, his name, and the missing space where Amara's should have been. He picked it up, then set it down as if paper could injure pride without touching skin. His phone lit with one final update from counsel. The international licensing hearing had consolidated ownership, technical competency, and operating license suspension into a single proceeding. Amara would testify as original platform owner. Dominic stared at those words until the room seemed to narrow around them. He had wanted to remove her name from paper. Now every paper that mattered was bringing her back. The international licensing hearing was held in a federal glass chamber 2 blocks from the river, a room built for decisions too expensive to appear emotional. Dominic arrived first in a black suit that still fit like power, though power no longer moved with him. Chloe followed in a white silk dress, her face carefully composed, her hands folded around a folder she had not prepared and could not defend. Cameras waited behind the press barrier. Lawyers lined the walls. Regulatory officials sat beneath clean white lights that made every falsehood look less decorative. Then Amara entered in crimson, carrying the red wax-sealed envelope against her side. No one announced her like a spectacle. The room adjusted anyway. The chairman sat at the center of the panel, silver-haired, still, and unreadable. Dominic looked toward him with the faint hope of a man searching for a stranger's neutrality. Amara did not search. The chairman was her uncle, the one family authority Dominic had never bothered to recognize. The hearing began with ownership. Dominic's legal team argued that Kingsley Biotech controlled operational development, investor funding, and commercial launch materials. Their language was expensive, polished, and fatally incomplete. Amara listened without interruption, her posture calm, her eyes fixed on the evidence table. When the panel requested technical explanation, Dominic leaned toward his counsel, and that small movement told the room more than his speeches ever had. The chairman turned to him. "Mr. Kingsley, please describe the core genetic delivery architecture without reference to marketing summaries." Dominic adjusted the paper before him. His voice arrived thin. The platform uses proprietary adaptive sequencing to create patient-specific innovation pathways. The senior regulatory examiner looked up. "That is a branding sentence." Chloe lowered her eyes to the folder. Dominic's fingers pressed against the table edge. "Our technical team can expand." The chairman's expression did not change. "You claimed authority over the platform. We are asking whether you understand what you claimed." Amara opened the red envelope. The wax seal broke beneath her thumb, not dramatically, but cleanly, like a boundary ending. She withdrew the patent draft, the Vanderpool ownership certificate, the password change logs, and the verified chain of custody exhibits. Under the ultraviolet panel, the hidden security signature appeared across the draft in pale blue-white lines. The chairman leaned forward for the first time. "The Vanderpool mark is authenticated." The words moved across the chamber with more force than accusation. Dominic's shoulders tightened. Chloe turned toward him, waiting for rescue. But rescue required truth, and he had spent months replacing truth with staging. Amara stood. The platform originated under Vanderpool family protection before Kingsley Biotech attached its name to the launch. The ownership covenant is non-transferable. The derivative licenses require my technical authorization. The commercialization attempt at the Gala was unauthorized. She placed the termination notice beside the access logs. And the attempt to remove me began 3 months before the public announcement. The chairman asked Dominic one final question. "Did you authorize the password changes to Dr. Vanderpool's laboratory access?" Dominic opened his mouth, then stopped. His confidence did not collapse into tears. It emptied into silence. His hand trembled once over the document, and he pulled it back under the table. I acted to protect company continuity, he said. Amara looked at him then, not as a wife, not as a victim, but as the only person in the room who understood the wound beneath his ambition. No, Dominic. You acted because you thought if my name was not on your papers, no one would see that your empire was running on my mind. The chamber went still. Chloe's face tightened as the sentence left no place for her white silk performance to hide. The regulatory panel recessed for 17 minutes. When they returned, the chairman read the decision in a voice without ornament. Kingsley Biotech's operating licenses connected to the genetic platform were revoked pending full ownership transfer review. All derivative commercialization was suspended. Chloe's professional conduct materials were referred for disciplinary and civil inquiry. And Vanderpool Labs was recognized as the original platform owner for continuing licensing evaluation. Dominic stared at the ruling as if paper had finally learned to speak against him. Amara gathered the patent draft, returned it to the red envelope, and walked past him without slowing. At the door, he found enough voice for her name. She stopped, but did not turn fully. You wanted a face you could control, she said. Now answer to the science you could not. Then she stepped into the corridor, crimson against white marble, leaving Dominic in black beneath the lights, surrounded by the empire he had claimed and could no longer operate. And this is the part betrayal never understands. It always sends a bill, but never to the person who pays first. At the beginning, the betrayed person pays in shock, in silence, in the terrible discipline of not collapsing when the room expects a spectacle. But later, the betrayer pays in exposure. He pays when the story he controlled meets the truth he ignored. Dominic Kingsley thought betrayal was a transfer of power. Remove the wife, keep the invention, decorate the lie with Chloe Sloan in white silk, and call it strategy. But betrayal is not strategy. It is a confession made too early by a person too arrogant to understand evidence. Tell me, what is the value of a throne if the mind that built it can stand up and leave? True sovereignty is the ability to walk away from a throne you built yourself, knowing the crown stays with you. 6 months later, Amara Vanderpool stood beneath the bright lights of the industry summit in a crimson silk suit, not as someone returning from humiliation, but as someone whose absence had corrected an entire market. The summit hall was wide, white, and filled with scientists, investors, medical leaders, and journalists who no longer asked where Dominic was. They asked what Amara would build next. Behind her, a 40-foot screen displayed the new seal of Vanderpool Labs, clean black lettering over a deep red emblem shaped like a protected genetic helix. On the podium rested the exclusive certification for the Vanderpool genetic platform, issued after full licensing review, ownership authentication, and technical validation. Amara accepted it with both hands. She did not lift it like a trophy. She held it like custody. The applause came slowly at first, then filled the hall with the weight of recognition that had arrived late, but finally arrived clean. The chairman sat in the front row, composed and proud, while the senior scientists of Vanderpool Labs stood behind Amara in quiet formation. No one needed to perform loyalty. Their work already did. Amara looked across the audience, past the cameras, past the luxury sponsors, past the kind of people who once mistook Dominic's confidence for competence. Today, she said, Vanderpool Labs confirms the acquisition of Kingsley Biotech's foreclosed research assets, clinical infrastructure, and dormant licensing facilities. The room shifted, not shocked, recalibrated. Dominic's empire had not vanished in fire or spectacle. It had become salvage. It had become equipment, contracts, lab space, and unfinished filings folded into the company of the woman he tried to erase. Amara continued, those assets will no longer serve borrowed authority. They will serve verified science. The sentence landed with surgical finality. Somewhere beyond that room, Dominic remained wealthy enough to be invited into buildings, but no longer powerful enough to define what happened inside them. Chloe's public-facing career had ended under disciplinary review and civil claims tied to false patent materials. Their names still appeared in articles, but only as context. Amara's name appeared on certifications, licensing frameworks, research, grants, and the future. After the summit, she walked through the glass corridor toward a private terrace overlooking the city from 50 stories up. The air was warm, close to 78 degrees, and the late afternoon sun turned the skyline gold without softening her edges. She carried no wedding ring scene, no sentimental relic, no need to prove she had survived. The red wax-sealed envelope rested in an archival case inside Vanderpool Labs, preserved not as pain, but as the document that marked the hour she chose sovereignty over pleading. Amara stepped onto the terrace, crimson against the clean blue sky, and watched the city spread beneath her like a map no longer owned by men who mistook women's brilliance for decoration. She had walked away from the throne. Then she bought the kingdom's laboratories and made them honest. This story is a fictional narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.